It arrived late. That was the first mistake. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. The standoff had already reached its breaking point long before the human ship appeared. Fleets from a dozen civilizations held position in the void. Weapons charged, shields primed, every commander waiting for the moment someone made the first move. Tension stretched across space like a wire ready to snap. No one trusted anyone. Not anymore. Too many betrayals. Too many wars disguised as negotiations. This was supposed to be different. A neutral system. A controlled meeting. A chance to prevent something bigger from happening. But no one had powered down their weapons. No one had relaxed. Because peace, in this part of the galaxy, was always temporary. And then, something appeared on the edge of every sensor array. At first, it barely registered. A mass reading. Small compared to the fleets already gathered. Moving slowly. Too slowly. Unidentified vessel entering perimeter, one of the automated systems reported. No one reacted. Because ships arrived all the time. Late diplomats. Observers. Cowards trying to stay out of the fight. But this one kept coming. Straight line. No deviation. At a speed that felt almost wrong. Not fast. Not even average. Just slow. Painfully slow. Is that human? Someone asked over an open channel. The data confirmed it. Origin, Earth. Signature, human. A ripple of reactions spread across the gathered fleets. Confusion. Amusement. Disbelief. That's what they send. One alien commander broadcast openly. No encryption. No restraint. Did they get lost on the way? Laughter followed. Not subtle. Not hidden. Broadcast across every frequency. Because there was no reason not to. The ship finally came into visual range. And the laughter grew louder. It was massive. But not in the way that inspired fear. In the way that felt outdated. Its structure was bulky. Lead. No sleek lines. No refined design. It looked like something built with excess material rather than precision. Armor stacked on armor. Segments reinforced beyond necessity. A relic. That thing belongs in a museum, another voice added. Or a scrapyard. More laughter. Because compared to the elegant, advanced warships surrounding it, the human vessel looked primitive. Overbuilt. Slow. So slow. It drifted into position at the edge of the standoff. Not integrating into any formation. Not aligning with any faction. Just there. Watching. Human vessel. A formal transmission finally reached it. State your intent. No response. The ship didn't accelerate. Didn't adjust position. Didn't even acknowledge the message. Of course, another commander mocked. It probably takes them an hour to process a signal. More laughter. The tension that had filled the system began to shift. Not gone, but diluted. Because now, there was something else to focus on. Something absurd. Something easy to dismiss. The human ship continued drifting. Slow. Unimpressive. Irrelevant. Until it stopped. Not gradually. Not through deceleration. One moment it was moving. The next, it wasn't. Completely still. Every sensor in the system registered the same thing at the same time. Velocity, 0. No residual drift. No correction. Just stopped. The laughter faded. Not completely, but enough. Because that wasn't normal. How did it? The question never finished. Because something else happened. Subtle. Easy to miss. If you weren't looking directly at it. The ship shifted. Not physically. Internally. Power signatures changed. Not increasing dramatically. Reallocating. Focusing. What is it doing? One of the observers asked. No one answered. Because they were all seeing the same thing. Targeting systems. Activating. Not scanning broadly. Not sweeping across fleets. Locking. On something very specific. Across the battlefield, one of the largest alien command vessels suddenly received an alert. Target acquisition detected. A pause. Source: human vessel. Confusion rippled through their systems. Impossible, the commander replied. That ship can't even. Then their sensors updated. Lock confirmed. Precision level, absolute. And just like that, everything changed. Because it wasn't a weak lock. It wasn't partial. It was perfect. As if the human ship had known exactly where to aim. Before it ever arrived. Across the open channels, the laughter stopped. Completely. No more mocking. No more commentary. Just silence. Heavy. Focused. Because suddenly, that slow, outdated, oversized ship didn't feel irrelevant anymore. It felt deliberate, calculated, and far more dangerous than anyone had assumed. The alien commander tried to respond. Human vessel, disengage your targeting systems immediately. The message cut off. Not jammed. Ignored. The human ship didn't move. Didn't reposition. Didn't charge weapons in any visible way. It just held the lock. Unshakable. Unbreakable. And in that moment, every fleet in the system realized the same thing. They had made a mistake. Not in strategy. Not in positioning. In judgment. Because whatever that ship was, whatever it had been built to do, it wasn't slow because it was weak. It was slow because it didn't need to be fast. And now, it had chosen a target. The silence that followed wasn't uncertainty. It was understanding. Because deep down, every commander present felt it. Whatever happened next was not going to be a warning. It was going to be a demonstration. They tried to go back to laughing. At first, it worked. The tension that had snapped into place when the human ship locked its target lingered for a moment, then began to loosen. Slowly, deliberately, because admitting concern would mean admitting doubt. And doubt had no place in a standoff like this. It's just a targeting glitch, one alien commander broadcast, his tone light, almost dismissive. Primitive systems misreading advanced signatures. A few scattered chuckles followed. Not as loud as before, but enough. Enough to rebuild the illusion. Because the alternative was uncomfortable. Across the battlefield, fleets resumed movement. Careful at first. Then more confidently. Ships adjusted formation, repositioning around the human vessel like it wasn't even there. Because tactically, it wasn't. Too slow. Too far behind. By the time it could reach any engagement zone, the battle would already be over. Ignore it, another voice said. It's irrelevant. That word spread quickly. Irrelevant. A label. A conclusion. Something easy to accept. Analysts across multiple fleets began running assessments. Mass-to-thrust ratio. Energy output. Weapon signatures. Everything they could extract from passive scans. The results only reinforced the narrative. Overbuilt, one report stated. Armor density exceeds functional necessity by 340%. Another added. Propulsion efficiency critically low. Acceleration curve outdated by at least 3 technological generations. A third concluded. Combat viability minimal in modern engagements. The data circulated. Shared openly between fleets. No secrecy. No concern. Because why would there be? It was a relic. Something that might have been impressive centuries ago. But now? Outclassed. Obsolete. Even the Allied forces, those who had stood alongside humanity before, began to question it. Is this a mistake? One Allied commander transmitted quietly on a secured channel. No answer came from the human ship. Another voice followed, less restrained. This is what they send to a standoff like this? One slow-moving fortress with no tactical mobility. A pause. It's embarrassing. That word lingered. Because it wasn't meant as an insult. It was confusion. Humanity had a reputation. Not always understood. Not always predictable. But never. Careless. And this? This looked careless. The ship itself didn't react. Didn't respond to any of it. It remained exactly where it had stopped. Massive. Silent. its bulk casting a faint shadow against distant starlight. No visible weapon systems charging. No defensive fields expanding. Just a heavy, unmoving presence. Around it, faster ships weaved effortlessly. Sleek vessels cutting through space with precision. Advanced propulsion systems allowing rapid repositioning, instant vector changes, flawless coordination. Compared to them, the human ship looked frozen in time. "Watch this," one alien pilot broadcast, his tone openly mocking. His vessel accelerated toward the human ship, curving around it in a tight arc. A display of agility, of superiority. His trajectory passed dangerously close to its surface. Close enough to highlight the difference. Speed versus weight. Precision versus brute construction. He completed the maneuver flawlessly, pulling away in a sharp climb. "Didn't even react," he said, laughter slipping back into his voice. More pilots followed. Not as reckless, but curious. They circled at a distance. Scanning. Observing. Looking for something. Anything. That justified its presence. They found nothing. No hidden systems. No unexpected readings. Just mass. Too much of it. Layer upon layer of reinforced structure. As if it had been designed with a single philosophy. More is better. A primitive mindset. Outdated. And yet, that targeting lock remained. Unchanged. Unbroken. Across the command vessel that had been marked, alerts continued to pulse. Lock persists. Attempts to disrupt it failed. Electronic countermeasures deployed. Ineffective. Signal scrambling. Ignored. It wasn't behaving like a normal targeting system. Because it wasn't reacting. It wasn't adjusting. It wasn't even tracking movement in the conventional sense. It just knew. And no matter what they did, it didn't let go. The commander frowned. "Why hasn't it fired?" one of his officers asked. No answer came. Because that was the question beneath everything. If it had a target, why wait? Why sit there? Slow, exposed, vulnerable. While faster, more advanced ships surrounded it. It didn't make sense. And that, more than anything, kept the unease alive beneath the surface. Because even as the laughter returned, even as fleets dismissed it, even as analysts labeled it obsolete, there was one thing they couldn't ignore. It hadn't disengaged. It hadn't retreated. It hadn't even tried to defend itself. It had simply arrived, chosen a target, and waited. Back on open channels, the mocking continued. Maybe it's broken. Maybe they sent it by accident. Maybe humans finally ran out of real ships. Laughter followed each line. But now, it sounded different. Forced. Because underneath it, something else was growing. A question no one wanted to say out loud. If it really was that outdated, that inefficient, that slow, then why? Out of everything humanity could have sent, did they choose this? The ship didn't answer. It didn't need to. Because the longer it remained there, silent, locked, waiting, the more that question began to matter. And the more the battlefield realized. Too late. That maybe. It wasn't a joke at all. The problem wasn't power. Plenty of civilizations had power. Massive fleets. Advanced weapons. Defenses layered so deeply they could withstand entire campaigns. That had never been the issue. The problem was speed. The enemy didn't fight like anyone else. They didn't hold territory. Didn't defend positions. They appeared. Struck. And were gone before anyone could respond. No warning. No build-up. Just impact. Entire fleets erased in seconds. Stations reduced to drifting debris before alarms could even finish sounding. By the time countermeasures activated, there was nothing left to counter. They're ghosts, one commander had said early in the war. Not because they were invisible, but because they were never there long enough to be caught. Every attempt to track them had failed. Every prediction model had broken down. Because they didn't follow patterns. Or worse, they adapted faster than anyone could recognize one. A weapon worked once. Never again. A defense held for a moment, then collapsed. It wasn't just speed of movement. It was speed of learning, of evolution. They didn't fight battles. They solved them. And once solved, they never repeated the same mistake. That was how the war had been lost. Not in one decisive moment, but over time, piece by piece. Every civilization that had tried to stand against them had been reduced, not through overwhelming force, but through inevitability. Because no matter what you did, they would adapt faster, strike sooner, disappear before you could react. Against something like that, traditional warfare didn't work. Fleets couldn't mobilize fast enough. Weapons couldn't lock on in time. Strategies became obsolete the moment they were used. They don't give you a battlefield, one analyst had concluded. They give you a moment. Then they take it away. That was the war everyone was fighting. And losing. Because there was no way to catch them. No way to pin them down. No way to force them into a fight they couldn't control. And now, in the middle of a standoff already stretched to its limit, humanity had sent a ship. A single ship. Slow. Massive. Unmoving. Against an enemy that lived on speed. It made no sense. It wasn't just ineffective. It was suicidal. If they show up here, one Allied commander said quietly, watching the drifting human vessel, that thing won't even have time to react. No one argued. Because it was true. The enemy would appear, strike, and be gone, before that ship could even begin to turn. Its size worked against it. Its mass made acceleration nearly impossible. Its systems, if the scans were accurate, were too heavy, too layered, too slow to respond in real time. Against anything else, it might have been a fortress. Against this, it was a target. Why would they send it? Another voice asked. Not mocking this time. Genuinely confused. Because humanity knew the threat. They had fought it too. They had lost to it. Just like everyone else. So why this? Why bring something that couldn't chase? Couldn't react? Couldn't even survive the kind of strike they were expecting? The human ship offered no explanation. It remained exactly where it had stopped. Silent. Heavy. Its targeting lock still fixed on that same alien command vessel. Unchanged. Almost forgotten. Amid everything else. But not entirely. Because even as fleets repositioned, even as strategies were debated, even as the looming threat of the enemy hung over everything, that lock remained. Constant. Unshakable. As if, no matter what else happened, that one thing was already decided. They're not preparing for the enemy, one observer finally said. The idea sounded wrong. Illogical. But it lingered. Because the evidence didn't support anything else. The human ship wasn't maneuvering. Wasn't coordinating. Wasn't doing anything that suggested it was ready to respond to a fast-moving threat. It wasn't trying to catch them. It wasn't trying to match their speed. It wasn't trying to fight them at all. And that was the part that didn't make sense. Because everyone else had tried. And everyone else had failed. So why would humanity, of all species, choose not to? Across the battlefield, tension returned. Stronger this time. Not because of what was happening, but because of what wasn't. The enemy hadn't appeared yet. But they would. They always did. And when they did, everything would change. Fleets would scatter. Weapons would fire. Ships would vanish. Chaos would take over. Just like it always had. And in the middle of it, that slow, massive, unmoving human ship would be caught in it. Destroyed before it could matter. That was the expectation. The prediction. The certainty. But still, it didn't move. Didn't prepare. Didn't react. It just waited. And somewhere, beneath all the logic and data and analysis, a single thought began to form. Quiet. Unwanted. What if it wasn't trying to keep up? What if it didn't need to? The idea didn't make sense. So no one said it out loud. But it stayed there. Growing. Because if the enemy's greatest strength was speed, then the only way to defeat them wasn't to match it. It was to make it irrelevant. And as the battlefield held its breath, waiting for the inevitable arrival, that slow, outdated human warship remained perfectly still, as if it had already accounted for something no one else could see. As if the war everyone was losing was about to be fought differently. It didn't move. That was the part no one could reconcile. Not after everything they had seen. Not after everything they knew about the enemy. Every doctrine in the galaxy had adapted to one truth. If you couldn't move fast, you didn't survive. Speed wasn't just an advantage anymore. It was survival itself. And yet, the human warship remained exactly where it had stopped. No course correction. No repositioning. No attempt to integrate with allied formations or take a defensive stance. It just held. Massive. Still. Like it had anchored itself to a point in space and refused to acknowledge anything beyond it. Is it even active? One observer asked, scanning its systems again. The readings came back the same as before. Minimal output. No visible weapon charge. No reactive shielding. Nothing that suggested readiness for a high-speed engagement. It's not even preparing, another voice added. And that was true. Across the battlefield, fleets adjusted their positions constantly. Micro-movements. Tiny shifts in formation. Everything optimized for reaction time. For survival. For the moment the enemy would appear. Because when they did, every fraction of a second mattered. But the human ship ignored all of it. It didn't track movement. Didn't align itself toward likely threat vectors. It didn't even rotate. It simply faced one direction. And stayed there. That same direction. That same target. The alien command vessel still caught in its lock. Disengage that targeting system. The commander transmitted again, this time with less confidence. Still. No response. Around them, faster ships continued to maneuver. Some moved deliberately close to the human vessel again. Testing it. Provoking it. Looking for a reaction. There was none. One ship passed directly across its forward arc. A dangerous move under normal circumstances. Still nothing. No tracking adjustment, the pilot reported. It didn't even register me. Laughter tried to return again. But it didn't hold this time. Because now, the behavior wasn't just strange. It was wrong. Not inactive. Intentional. It's not ignoring us, one analyst said slowly. It's filtering. The word hung in the air. Filtering. As if everything happening around it, every movement, every signal, every potential threat, had already been evaluated and dismissed. Not worth reacting to. Not worth acknowledging. Because it didn't matter. That idea settled uneasily across the battlefield. Because if that was true, then the ship wasn't passive. It was selective. And whatever it had selected was the only thing it cared about. Time stretched. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The enemy still hadn't appeared. But the tension didn't ease. It built. Because something about this, about the stillness of that ship, felt like a contradiction. Everything else was preparing for chaos. And it was waiting for something specific. Then, it began. At first, it was almost impossible to detect. A shift in its internal systems. Not a surge. Not a spike. A redistribution. Power moving. Not outward. Inward. Deep into the core of the vessel. Energy fluctuation detected, one sensor officer reported. The numbers were strange. Not high. Not low. Just concentrated. As if everything the ship had was being drawn into a single point. What is it doing? Someone asked. No one answered. Because the readings didn't match any known weapon system. There was no charge buildup. No targeting spread. No signs of a conventional attack. Just a slow, deliberate gathering. And then, the sound. Not through space, but through sensors. A vibration. Low. Constant. A hum. It spread outward from the human ship. Not as energy, but as presence. Something that could be felt in the data itself. In the way instruments began to register slight interference. Not disruption. Distortion. As if the space around the ship was starting to behave differently. Ships nearby began pulling back instinctively. Not because they were ordered to. Because something about it felt wrong. Distance increasing, one pilot reported. "I don't like this." Across multiple fleets, the same reaction took hold. Formation lines widened. Ships adjusted their positions. Not retreating, but creating space. Without fully understanding why. The human warship remained still. At the center of it all. The hum deepened. Barely louder, but heavier. More present. And now, every sensor in range was focused on it. Trying to understand. Trying to classify. Trying to predict. And failing. Because this wasn't a weapon anyone recognized. It wasn't charging. It wasn't preparing to fire. It wasn't reacting to anything around it. It was doing something else entirely. Something that didn't require movement. Didn't require speed. Something that made the idea of chasing completely irrelevant. Back in the alien command vessel still locked in its sights, the alerts changed. Energy lock strengthening. The commander frowned. "That's not possible." "It hasn't." The readings updated again. The lock wasn't just holding. It was deepening. Becoming more precise. More absolute. As if whatever the human ship was doing was tightening its grip on reality itself. The hum continued. Steady. Unstoppable. And for the first time, as every fleet in the system watched that slow, outdated, unmoving vessel, the thought that had been forming quietly in the background became impossible to ignore. It wasn't built to chase. It wasn't built to react. It wasn't built to keep up. Because it didn't need to. Whatever it was about to do wouldn't require movement at all. No one saw it fire. That was the first thing everyone agreed on later. No flash. No surge. No visible discharge of energy or matter. Nothing that matched any known form of attack. The human warship didn't move. It didn't recoil. Didn't vent heat. Didn't even change position. It remained exactly as it had been. Silent, massive, and still. But something happened. The hum. That low, constant vibration threading through every sensor. Shifted. Not louder. Sharper. Focused. As if everything the ship had been gathering, everything it had been preparing, had just been released. Did it? The question never finished. Because there was nothing to see. Only a brief distortion. A ripple. Not through space as a wave, but through the structure of it. A momentary bending. So subtle most systems almost missed it. Except the ones that were looking directly at the ship. They caught it. A single, precise fluctuation. Origin, the human vessel. Vector, instantaneous. Destination, unknown. Then, silence. The hum stopped. Completely. As if it had never been there. The battlefield held still. Every fleet. Every system. Waiting for something to follow. An impact. An explosion. A reaction. Nothing came. Did it malfunction? Someone asked. No one answered. Because the data didn't show failure. It showed completion. A process that had run its course. And ended. That was it, another voice said. Confusion spread again. Because if that had been an attack, it had done nothing. No target hit. No visible effect. The alien command vessel still locked in its sights remained intact. Untouched. Exactly where it had been. The tension began to unravel. Slightly. Because whatever they had expected, that hadn't been it. Primitive systems, one commander said, trying to reclaim certainty. It discharged into nothing. A few hesitant agreements followed. Yes, misfire. Energy collapse. Explanations. All of them wrong. Because across the battlefield, one system finally updated. A distant relay. Not in the immediate conflict zone. Not even close. Light years away. At the edge of contested space. An automated observation post registered something. A fluctuation. Then, a cascade of failures. Its sensors turned outward. toward a region where no major fleets were supposed to be. And then, it saw them. The enemy. A strike group. One of the same fleets that had been tearing through civilizations across the galaxy. Fast. Untraceable. Unstoppable. Except now. They weren't moving. They weren't attacking. They weren't even holding formation. They were breaking. Ships that had once moved with impossible precision began to distort. Not under fire. Not from impact. From something internal. Their structures warped. Edges bending at angles that shouldn't exist. Hull integrity collapsing. Not outward, but inward. As if space itself had turned against them. No explosions. No debris fields formed from violent destruction. Just disintegration. Clean. Absolute. One by one. Then all at once. The fleet vanished. Not escaped. Not cloaked. Gone. Reduced to nothing that could be tracked. Nothing that could be recovered. The relay tried to transmit the data. It barely made it through. But it was enough. Across the battlefield. The information arrived. Fragmented. Incomplete. But undeniable. Enemy fleet. A pause. No longer exists. Silence followed. Total. Because everyone understood what that meant. It hadn't been a misfire. It hadn't failed. It hadn't done nothing. It had done something. Somewhere else. Instantly. Across impossible distance. Without travel. Without delay. Every sensor turned back to the human ship. Still there. Still unmoving. Still locked onto its original target. As if nothing had happened. As if it hadn't just erased a fleet that no one else had ever managed to stop. How? Someone whispered. No one had an answer. Because this broke everything. Speed didn't matter. Distance didn't matter. Reaction time didn't matter. The enemy's greatest advantage, their ability to appear, strike, and vanish, had just been rendered meaningless. Because whatever the human ship had done, it hadn't chased them. It hadn't tracked them in motion. It hadn't tried to intercept. It had simply decided. And they were gone. Across the battlefield, fear finally took hold. Not panic. Something colder. Something deeper. Because this wasn't just a new weapon. This was a new rule. And no one understood it. The alien command vessel still caught in the human ship's targeting lock received another update. Lock integrity, absolute. The commander stared at the display. Because now, he understood something he hadn't before. That lock wasn't a threat. It was a certainty. And whatever had just happened, light years away, could happen here. Without warning. Without movement. Without a chance to react. The human ship didn't fire again. It didn't need to. Because the first shot had already changed everything. Forever. At first, they thought it was a coincidence. 1 fleet gone was impossible. 2 was error. 3 was something else entirely. The second collapse came before anyone could even process the first. Another report. Another distant system. Another enemy strike group. Gone. No warning. No engagement. No signs of battle. Just absence. And then, a third. Closer this time. Close enough that some of the observing fleets caught fragments of it in real time. Ships moving at impossible speeds. Phasing in and out of detectable space. Suddenly, stopping. Not slowing. Stopping. As if something had reached out and held them in place. For a fraction of a moment. They existed. Frozen. Then, they broke. Not under force. Under rejection. Their structures collapsing inwards. Folding into nothingness as if reality itself refused to contain them any longer. Gone. Just like the others. Across the battlefield, panic began to spread. Not loud. Not chaotic. But undeniable. Because this wasn't a weapon anyone understood. This wasn't even an attack. In any traditional sense. The human ship still hadn't moved. Still hadn't fired. At least not in any way that could be seen. And yet, targets were disappearing across distances that should have made it impossible. How far? Someone asked. The answer came back. And it didn't make sense. Multiple light years. Silence followed. Because that number should have meant safety. Distance was the one constant everyone relied on. If something was far enough away, you had time. Time to react. Time to prepare. Time to survive. But now, distance meant nothing. The human ship wasn't firing at its enemies. It was firing through space itself. Ignoring the space in between. Ignoring time. Ignoring everything that made combat predictable. No travel delay, an analyst whispered, staring at the incoming data. No propagation. Another voice added, quieter, almost afraid to say it out loud. It's instantaneous. That word settled into the system like a shockwave. Instantaneous. Not fast. Not near light speed. Not advanced propulsion or faster weapons. No. Something else. Something that didn't move at all. Across the battlefield, ships began to reposition again. But this time, not with confidence. Not with strategy. With uncertainty. Because for the first time, movement didn't guarantee survival. Speed didn't guarantee escape. The enemy's greatest advantage, their entire method of war, had just been stripped away. They couldn't outrun this. They couldn't outmaneuver it. They couldn't even predict it. Because there was no path to track. No trajectory to follow. No weapon traveling through space. Just a decision. And an outcome. The enemy realized it too. For the first time since their campaigns had begun. They hesitated. Not vanished. Not struck again. Hesitated. Their fleets, once fluid and unstoppable, began to scatter in ways that felt uncertain. Uncoordinated. Afraid. Because adaptation required data. Required patterns. Required understanding. And this gave them none. How do you adapt to something that doesn't follow rules? How do you counter something that doesn't travel? How do you defend against something that can reach you? No matter where you are? You don't. Across the standoff, every fleet now looked at the human warship differently. Not as a relic. Not as a joke. But as something else entirely. Something that had changed the nature of the battlefield without ever moving from it. The alien command vessel still caught in its targeting lock began to receive cascading alerts. Multiple fleet losses confirmed. Cause, unknown. Correlation, human vessel activity. The commander's voice, when it came, was no longer steady. That's not possible. It hasn't fired again. But the systems disagreed. Each collapse. Each disappearance. Timed. Aligned. Connected. Not through visible action. But through something deeper. The lock. That same lock that had never wavered. Never weakened. Now understood for what it truly was. Not a targeting system. A connection. A certainty. And once established, distance no longer applied. One of the officers finally said what no one else wanted to. We're all in range. Silence followed. Because there was no argument. No counterpoint. No reassurance. Just truth. Every ship. Every fleet. Every system in that region of space was equally vulnerable. It didn't matter how far you were. It didn't matter how fast you could move. It didn't matter how advanced your defenses were. If the human ship decided, you were already hit. Across the battlefield, weapons powered down. Not by order. By instinct. Because fighting something like this felt meaningless. And still, the human ship did not move. It didn't pursue. Didn't chase. Didn't even acknowledge the panic spreading around it. It simply remained in place. Its systems quiet once more. As if everything it needed to do had already been done. And as more distant reports came in, more fleets collapsing, more targets disappearing without warning, one final realization settled across everyone watching. The war had been built on speed, on movement, on the ability to strike and vanish before consequences could arrive. But now, consequences didn't travel. They didn't chase. They didn't need to. Because for the first time, distance meant nothing. The explanation wasn't meant to be heard. It wasn't broadcast. Not openly. It slipped through the cracks. A fragment of a transmission. Intercepted, partially decoded, and passed through channels that no longer cared about secrecy as much as survival. At first, it didn't make sense. Because it didn't describe a weapon. It described a philosophy, a design choice, a rejection of everything the galaxy believed about war. Mobility is a limitation. The line appeared in the intercepted data, stripped of context. Analyzed, questioned, dismissed. For a moment. Because it contradicted everything. Speed was survival. Movement was dominance. Every advancement in warfare had pushed toward faster reaction times, quicker deployment, immediate engagement. And yet, this said the opposite. Another line followed. Movement introduces delay. Now that felt wrong in a different way. Because delay was unavoidable. Everything moved. Everything took time. Even the fastest weapons, even the most advanced systems, had to cross space to reach their targets. That was the rule. The foundation of every strategy ever built. Until now, the transmission continued. Fragmented. But enough. Remove the need to move, and delay ceases to exist. Silence spread as the meaning settled. Because now, it aligned. Not with theory. With what they were seeing. The human warship hadn't chased a single target. Hadn't repositioned. Hadn't accelerated. And yet, it had reached across light years. And erased fleets as if they were standing still. Because to it, they were. More data surfaced. Technical. Difficult to process. References to spatial anchoring. Gravitational stabilization. Field density calculations that exceeded anything previously considered possible. The structure is not mass for defense. Another line. It is mass for presence. Presence. That word echoed differently. Because this wasn't armor. This wasn't redundancy. This wasn't over-engineering. This was purpose. The ship wasn't built to move through space. It was built to hold it. To anchor itself so completely, so absolutely, that everything around it became relative. Another fragment. Establish fixed reference point. Override local spatial variance. Project effect without displacement. Now, it made sense. Or at least, it began to. The ship wasn't slow. It wasn't inefficient. It wasn't outdated. It had abandoned speed entirely. Because speed was a limitation. Something you needed. Only if you had to go somewhere. But what if you didn't? What if you could reach anything? Without moving at all? Across the battlefield, every commander began to look at the human vessel differently. Not as something stuck in place, but as something that had chosen that place. Carefully. Precisely. Because from that position, it didn't need to move. Everything else moved relative to it. And that meant everything else was already within reach. The transmission continued. One final segment stabilizing enough to be understood. Mass threshold required to resist external distortion. Anchor must not yield. Anchor must not drift. Anchor must be absolute. That word again. Absolute. Not fast. Not reactive. Not adaptive. Absolute. Because if the anchor moved, even slightly, the system failed. The connection broke. The reach collapsed. So instead, they had built something that could not be moved. Not easily. Not quickly. Not at all. By anything short of total destruction. And while it remained fixed in place, it could act instantly, anywhere within its field. Across the battlefield, a chilling realization took hold. All those layers of armor, all that excessive mass, all the things they had mocked, weren't inefficiencies. They were requirements. Necessary to hold position against the forces it was generating. Necessary to remain stable. While everything else bent around it. One of the alien analysts finally spoke, their voice quieter than before. It's not slow. They hesitated. Because the word they needed didn't quite exist in their understanding. It's fixed. Another voice corrected them. No. A pause. Then, more carefully, it's anchored. That was closer. Because anchored meant it wasn't failing to move. It meant it had chosen not to. Because movement would only weaken it, reduce it, limit what it could do. The human warship remained exactly where it had always been. Silent again. Still. Massive. But now, no one saw it as outdated. No one saw it as inefficient. No one saw it as a joke. Because now they understood. That ship didn't chase its enemies. It didn't need to. Because wherever they went, they never left its reach. And as another distant fleet vanished without warning, the final truth settled across every mind watching. It had never been slow. It had never been behind. It had never been trying to keep up. Because it wasn't part of the race at all. It stood outside it. Above it. Anchored in a way that made speed irrelevant. And in doing so, it had become something far more dangerous than anything that could ever move fast. It had become absolute. At first, they did what they always did. They adapted. Because that was how they had won every war before this one. Not with brute force. Not with overwhelming numbers. But with change. Every time an enemy discovered something new, they learned from it. Every time a weapon worked, they made it obsolete. Every time a defense held, they broke it. That was their strength. Not speed alone, but the ability to evolve faster than anything trying to stop them. So when the first fleets vanished, they didn't panic. They adjusted. Across distant systems, their formations dissolved. Tight, coordinated strike groups broke apart into scattered units. Ships separated by vast distances. No central pattern. No predictable alignment. Because if the human weapon relied on targeting groups, then there would be no groups. Only fragments. Harder to detect. Harder to track. Harder to eliminate. For a moment, it seemed logical. For a moment, it felt like control. Then the first scattered unit disappeared. Alone. No nearby allies. No shared signature. Just gone. No pattern. No warning. The second vanished moments later. Then a third. Distance didn't protect them. Separation didn't hide them. Because whatever was reaching them wasn't looking for formations. It wasn't searching. It was selecting. And once selected, nothing else mattered. A new tactic emerged. Cloaking. Advanced concealment systems activated across their fleets. Ships phased partially out of detectable space. Energy signatures suppressed to near zero. Invisible. Untouchable. Or at least, that's what had always been true before. Now, it changed nothing. Cloaked vessels began to fail. Not exposed. Not revealed. Just erased. As if whatever the human ship was doing didn't rely on detection at all. Didn't need to see them. Because it already knew where they were. Panic began to form. Small at first. Contained within isolated command units. Then it spread. Because every solution they deployed, every adaptation they relied on, failed. Instantly. Accelerate beyond engagement thresholds. The command echoed across their networks. If they couldn't hide, they would outrun it. Ships pushed their engines past safe limits. Velocity climbed beyond standard combat parameters. Beyond sustainable levels. Faster. Faster than anything had ever moved in battle before. Because if distance didn't matter, maybe time still did. Maybe if they moved fast enough, they could escape the moment of impact. Escape the decision. Before it reached them. For a brief moment, it looked like it might work. Trajectories stretched. Ships blurring across space. Unpredictable. Unreachable. Then, they started disappearing again. Mid-flight. At maximum velocity. Gone. Without slowing. Without even knowing what had happened. Because speed meant nothing. You couldn't outrun something that didn't travel. You couldn't escape something that didn't chase. You couldn't evade something that had already reached you the moment it decided to. Across the battlefield, the realization hit all at once. Not gradually, not as a theory, as truth. There was no counter, no adjustment, no next step. For the first time, their evolution failed them, because evolution required time. And this left them none. Back at the standoff, every observing fleet watched in stunned silence. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Scattered units. Gone. Cloaked vessels. Gone. High-velocity fleets. Gone. Different tactics. Different strategies. Same result. The human ship hadn't moved. Not once. It hadn't needed to, because every change the enemy made was still happening within its reach, within its field, within its certainty. One by one, the unstoppable force that had dominated the galaxy collapsed. Not in battle, not in resistance, but in failure. Complete. Irrecoverable. The alien command vessel still locked in the human ship site received its final set of external reports. Remaining fleet presence, minimal. Adaptive response, ineffective. Survival probability. The system paused. 0. No one spoke after that, because there was nothing left to say. The enemy, the force that had rewritten the rules of war, had just encountered something it couldn't adapt to. Something that didn't give it time to learn. Something that didn't play by any rule it understood. And for the first time, it couldn't run. It couldn't hide. It couldn't evolve fast enough to survive. Because the moment it tried, it was already too late. And as the last scattered remnants vanished into nothing, a final, terrifying truth settled across the battlefield. This wasn't a war anymore. It was a conclusion. And no matter where the enemy went, no matter what they became, they would never be fast enough to escape it. It didn't end with an explosion. No final charge. No desperate last stand. No moment where the battlefield erupted into chaos one last time before everything burned out. Instead, it slowed, almost imperceptibly at first. A hesitation in the enemy's movements. A delay where there should have been none. Across multiple systems, their ships, once perfectly synchronized, began to lose cohesion. Not dramatically, subtly, a fraction of a second too late. A maneuver slightly off. The kind of errors that, before, never existed. They're desynchronizing, one observer whispered, staring at incoming data. Because that was the core of their strength. Not just speed, but coordination. Every ship, every strike, every retreat. Perfectly aligned. Like a single intelligence operating across countless bodies. And now, that unity was slipping. Another report came in. A fleet attempted a coordinated strike on a distant world. Half the ships engaged. The other half didn't. They drifted. Idle. Unresponsive. No damage. No interference. Just disconnected. What's happening to them? Someone asked. No answer came. Because no one had ever seen this before. The enemy didn't malfunction. They adapted. They evolved. They improved. They didn't fall apart. And yet, that's exactly what was happening. Across the battlefield, sensors tracked their movements. Or rather, their lack of movement. Ships that once moved like living things now hung in space like debris. Still intact. Still powered. But empty of purpose. No commands. No reactions. Just drifting. Then, another shift. Wider this time. A command node, one of the unseen centers coordinating their entire network, went silent. Not destroyed. Not attacked. Just gone. Its signals ceased. Its influence vanished. And with it, entire regions of their forces lost direction. They're losing their network, an analyst said, their voice barely steady. That was the word. Network. Because that's what the enemy had always been. Not just fleets. A system. A distributed intelligence spanning across space. Every ship a part of it. Every action connected. And now, those connections were breaking. Not one at a time. All at once. Across vast distances, more nodes fell silent. No explosions marked their end. No visible strikes. Just absence. Like something was reaching into their structure and removing pieces without resistance. Back at the standoff, every fleet watched in complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Because what they were witnessing was something far beyond victory. This wasn't defeat. This was erasure. Systematic. Precise. Unavoidable. The human warship remained exactly where it had always been. Still. Unchanged. No visible signs of exertion. No indication of strain. As if everything happening across the galaxy had required no effort at all. One final surge of data came through. A cluster of remaining enemy ships. Scattered, uncoordinated, attempting to regroup. For a brief moment, they aligned, tried to reconnect, to rebuild what had been lost. Then, they stopped. All at once. No distortion. No collapse. No visible cause. Their systems simply ceased responding. Engines idled. Weapons powered down. Navigation halted. And for the first time since the war began, they didn't disappear. They didn't strike. They didn't run. They just drifted. Lifeless. Not destroyed. Disconnected. Empty. Across the galaxy, the same scene repeated. Fleet after fleet. Silent. Still. As if whatever had driven them, whatever had coordinated them, was no longer there. The war, the unstoppable force that had consumed entire civilizations, didn't end in fire. It ended in quiet. A silence so complete, it felt unreal. Because there was no victory cry. No moment of triumph. Just the absence of conflict. The absence of threat. The absence of something that had once seemed impossible to stop. Back in the command vessel still locked in the human ship sites, the final status report arrived. Enemy network, non-functional. A pause. No coordinated activity detected. Another pause. War status. The system hesitated. Because it didn't have a category for this. Didn't have a definition that fit what had just happened. Concluded. That word settled across the battlefield. Not victory. Not defeat. Conclusion. Because there had been no final battle. No last exchange of fire. No decisive clash. Just a quiet, unstoppable force. Removing the enemy's ability to exist as a threat. The human warship remained still. Its targeting lock finally released. Not because it had failed. Because it was no longer needed. Across the battlefield, fleets slowly powered down their weapons. Not out of trust. Out of understanding. Because whatever had just ended this war had never required their help. And as the last enemy ships drifted silently through space, empty, disconnected, and harmless, one final truth became clear to everyone watching. The war hadn't been won. It had been ended. And it hadn't taken speed, or numbers, or even a battle. Just a single, unmoving presence that refused to let the war continue. At first, no one moved. Not the allied fleets. Not the observers watching from distant systems. Not even the scattered remnants of what had once been an unstoppable force. Because there was nothing left to react to. The war, if it could still be called that, had ended without a moment anyone could point to. No final shot. No decisive clash. Just a gradual, undeniable silence that had spread across the stars. And at the center of it all, it remained. The human warship. Exactly where it had been from the beginning. Massive. Still. Unchanged. If someone had arrived now, late, unaware of everything that had happened, they might have made the same mistake others had made before. They might have seen it as slow, outdated, irrelevant, because it looked the same. There were no visible marks of battle, no signs of strain or victory, no transformation that reflected what it had just done. It simply existed, heavy against the void, like it had always been there. And now, like it always would be, the surrounding fleets kept their distance. Not by command, by instinct. Because something about that ship had changed for them. even if it hadn't changed at all. Before, it had been a curiosity, then a joke, then a question. Now, it was something else entirely. Something no one had words for. Because how do you define power? When it doesn't move. When it doesn't chase. When it doesn't even need to act in a way you can see. Across command channels, discussions began again. Careful. Measured. Different. No one dismissed it anymore. No one underestimated it. Because everyone now understood that what they had witnessed wasn't just a new weapon. It was a new idea. A redefinition of what strength meant. For centuries, power had been measured the same way. Speed. Reaction time. The ability to strike first. Strike fast. To outmaneuver, outthink, outpace. Everything had been built around that. Every fleet. Every doctrine. Every war. And it had worked. Until it didn't. Because now, there was something that didn't rely on any of it. Something that didn't care how fast you were. Didn't care how far you ran. Didn't care how well you adapted. Because it didn't give you the time to do any of those things. It simply arrived at the conclusion. Instantly. Inevitably. One of the Allied commanders finally spoke, his voice low, almost to himself. We thought they were behind. No one answered. Because they had all thought that. When the ship first appeared. Slow, oversized, inefficient. It had seemed like a relic. Something left over from an earlier era. Something that hadn't kept up. But now, that assumption felt almost embarrassing. Because it hadn't been behind. It had been beyond. Operating on principles no one else had even considered. Across the void, a final transmission began to form. Not rushed. Not reactive. Deliberate. Simple. It didn't carry technical data. Didn't explain what had happened. Didn't justify or threaten. It didn't need to. Because the galaxy had already seen enough. When the signal was sent, it reached every system still listening. Every fleet. Every world. Clear. Unmistakable. You measure power in speed. A pause. Not for effect. For understanding. We measure it in inevitability. That was all. No elaboration. No follow-up. Because the meaning didn't need to be explained. It had already been demonstrated. Across the stars, silence followed the transmission. Not confusion. Not fear alone. Something deeper. Acceptance. Because now, every civilization understood the same thing. Speed could be counted. Adaptation could be overcome. Even overwhelming force could be resisted. But inevitability couldn't be fought. It couldn't be outrun. It couldn't be delayed. Because by the time you realized it was coming, it had already arrived. Back at the center of the now quiet battlefield, the human warship remained in place. Unmoving. Unchanging. Almost forgotten again. At least on the surface. But not truly. Not anymore. Because even as attention shifted away, even as fleets began to disperse, even as the galaxy tried to process what had just happened, everyone knew. That ship wasn't just sitting there. It was present. Anchored. A constant. A reminder. That somewhere, at any moment, something could decide the outcome, without moving at all. And no one would ever laugh at that again.